Okay, so you want to tell everybody what happened on Facebook?
Scrolling through Facebook on the day that the co-owner of A Lovely Heart airs, I'd already seen it a couple months prior, hadn't watched it on this airing. I forget most of what happens, but then I just see Lucy on Facebook just going, huh? What? So I've been looking forward to this so you can properly articulate what engendered that reaction.
It was mostly the very end, so we'll have to get to all that. But the rest of the episode was just mostly just typical class confusing bad stuff.
You did say that you liked the second episode more, and this is definitely a two-parter that's two parts of a singular piece. So I don't know if we should necessarily approach them like two different episodes. So just looking at it as all one story, I gotta say I did not care for this one. I mentioned a couple of videos back that one of these stories coming up, or a couple of them at least, were stuff that I actually found decently interesting and better than the rest of the episodes. This two-parter was one of those, and it does not hold up nearly as well as I thought it did. Like, I feel like the first time I watched this story, I was just so enamored with the concept of the petals that like carried the whole thing for me. Because looking at it now, the petals, like the man-eating flower petals that like duplicate and are technically not even plants, is like the most interesting thing in the episode, and I always want to do more with that.
The whole thing with the petals for me was just kind of strange, and it was a bit too convenient, all tied together with the Shadow King. And this was the only thing that could kill the petals. It's like they're trying to connect two things that don't have any connection together.
Because we need a cop out so that Charlie doesn't have to use the cabinet, but then we find out at the very end that he only needed to use one soul from the cabinet anyway, and the governess just didn't tell him that. Like, technically, you didn't even need that cop out. Like, we had a built in cop out that you didn't need this other cop out, but then how are we going to end the Shadowkin story? You could have just had it where April does her whole thing with the king. She becomes the new king, goes back home and tells them to seal off, and Charlie takes care of the petals, and they're two completely different things. Like, instead of just two episodes, you could have made it two stories. You could have done flower petals for a story, and you could have done the Shadowkin for a story.
Actually, kind of strange because when they kept cutting, slicing them together, I was like, why are they doing this? This has no connection. And then at the very last second, they have, okay, April makes all the petals go away. So, like, that was the connection.
So this is a constant thing. Like, when we're cutting between climactic moments, it's less of a distraction, because even though the storylines aren't really related, it's like, okay, both of these moments are at their climax for the sake of keeping emotions high. You don't want to have, like, Charlie and Quill in the cabinet have the climax of that, like, storyline, then it ends and we get a moment of relief, and then we're right back to the other characters and they're in the middle of a climax and, like, emotions go from low to high again. You want to keep the emotion in the same place until the stories end. So there I'm fine with cutting between, but there was a specific moment in Bravish Heart where I'm like, why are we cutting these two things together? I remember. It's when Ram and April are in the shadow world, and we're cutting between them and their parents talking, and Tanya's there. Their dads are arguing. Tanya's like, do either of you know your own children? We see, like, all of them react to April's mom, her heart's glowing, and then we cut straight from that to April and Ram, and I'm like, wait a second. Like, I know that that's, like, her mom feeling a connection with her, but you can't just end that scene on, oh no, her heart's glowing. It is, her heart's glowing. She says, oh, I felt April. I felt a connection. And then that's when you cut back to April. The frame that you cut on should not be everyone reacts to her heart glowing.
It's just more just slicing everything together all the time. This one makes a bit more sense with the sex scene.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like, it makes sense, but it takes a minute before you realize what's happening. And so it's like, why are we cutting between the Shadowkin and April and Ram having an intimate moment? Like, that is another place where I would edit it differently, but I'm not actually sure if my edit would have been better in this case.
Thing is kind of played up for a laugh too.
What they think they're doing is they're humanizing the Shadowkin by giving him this funny moment. But I would have played that differently. We're like, yes, use that as a chance to humanize your villain, but do it not like in a funny way, because what just happened in that scene is that he basically got coerced into having sex by a third party against his will. Like, he lost complete control of his bodily autonomy. That's not a joke scene. That should be scary for him. That should be a moment where, like, bad, generic doomsday bad guy, and then he gets terrified because he lost control to a teenage girl.
Yeah, and this is played up a lot. It's a little tone deaf, I guess.
Yeah, like, I don't want to say treat it like a rape scene, but, like, that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, the more you think about it, kind of
Like,
disturbing.
instead of "do you mind if we cuddle for a little bit," like, the last line of that moment should, or like the last moment of that sequence should be like, he is terrified, he has to fix this.
And they don't play it that way at all. Then they have to have the, oh, they forgot to lock the door moment.
Yeah, which, I mean, she handles it reasonably well, her mom. Like, I mean, just on the subject of sort of out of place comedy where it's not necessarily appropriate, we also do that with her dad, where in the first part, all of the drama is her dad shows up, and that creates some real bad emotions for her, especially because she's tied with the Shadow King. And then in the second part, like, he gets all of the comedy relief lines until his big speech at the end. And until that moment, it feels like we kind of don't know what to do with this character, so just give him all the jokes.
Yeah, and it's kind of awkward because he tried to do a murder-suicide with his family.
Yeah, and then, like, by the end of the episode, like, with that speech, and when he goes away, and she's like, he's hoping that him, but she is, like, making no promises, they don't hug or anything, there's no real reconciliation or closure. That's actually a pretty mature way to handle that. Like, this is a big deal. This isn't a situation where going through a life or death, like, conflict together is going to fix what you did. Those two extremes we have give him all of the funny lines, and sort of, they might have accidentally, by giving him all of the comedy relief lines, like, endeared him to the audience more than they should have. And I get that that's just like making him a real person instead of just the jerk dad character, but I don't know, that is a decision that I would question if I were in the room while it was being written.
I just want to talk about the ending that made me go crazy for a little bit.
Okay.
April just freaks out after almost killing her dad, magically heals her mom, and then opens a portal and just runs into it.
Right. You're totally right. Like, looking at this as a singular piece, like, knowing that part two is coming, what's going to happen with that, that's a bit of a problem. But with a week between these, that is just bizarre. Like, oh, hey, I'm sharing a heart with an alien dictator. That means I can fix your legs.
But even when it has the second part, I mean, what made her realize she could do all of that at the last second? It just comes out of nowhere.
And, like, we play it realistically, too, where, like, even though she can use her legs again, she hasn't been doing it for years until she's still in the wheelchair. It's only at the very last scene of the episode that I realized that that's what they're doing, because most TV shows wouldn't do that. Most TV shows would do, like, her legs are healed, okay, she can use her legs. But they wait until the end of the story to be like, no, that's not what we're doing. So for the rest of the episode, when she's still in the wheelchair, I'm just like, why are you still in there?
That whole ending is just very confusing. And what made April, like, realize she can go and find the Shadow King, or open portals for that matter?
Well, I mean, the implication is just that because their connection is getting stronger, she just knows all of the things that he knows. She knows the rules of combat and knows all of the, like, stuff about their culture.
Yeah, I guess you can look at it that way. But it just seemed just to come out, all this came out the last few seconds. I was like, what the?
Speaking of which, that conversation when they're at, like, the temple or whatever, and she explains, like, their religion, and Ram uses it as a real thin segue to talk about his religion. Like, I don't know, like, I get what you're trying to do, but that feels like a real awkward, like, transition between conversation points.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to remember saying, like, okay, my religion is, like, if you do a good deed, that gets you closer to God or something.
Basically, what he says is, no matter what you do, whether you actually believe in God or not, God as an idea is always present whenever you do a good deed, and the devil is always present whenever you do a bad deed, just as, like, a concept. Like, he doesn't actually believe in the capital G God, but God is in your actions. And that's interesting. We don't really do anything else with it in this episode, but it feels strange to me. She talks about what the Shadowkin worship, and he goes, "Oh, well, that's weird." And she's like, "Well, most religions are," and he takes offense to that. That's natural. Then he uses that as a segue to just go into what his religion is about, and it feels less natural.
Yeah, it feels like kind of just an excuse to just talk about his religion.
Which, I mean, the part about the Shadowkin sort of does, because we're paralleling them with Quill, because in her, like, I think it's in her next scene after that conversation, where she pretty much parrots the same philosophy they do, which is that the universe is out to get you at all times, and you should fight pretty much everything. Look out for number one, because everyone is trying to kill you. And so that's like where she's coming from. She wants to destroy the Shadowkin because she thinks just like them. It's that we don't do anything with it, because the Shadowkin are, like, gone. If I'm remembering correctly, they're gonna show up again, probably, maybe? I don't know. You take those conversations about, like, your beliefs and how they're informing these characters, and then you do stuff with it, right?
Hmm.
Like, at the end, at the climax, when April's dad comes in and stops her from killing the king, like, Ram is just sort of in the background, just putting out little nothing comments during that conversation. Why not make that a scene between the three of them? Have him bring in that idea back again, like, God is in your actions, do good actions, sometimes that means sparing your enemies. That would just be a nice little way to have closure, and do something with Quill where it's like maybe she realizes, oh, I'm just like the Shadowkin, maybe I shouldn't be so paranoid and on the offensive all the time. And maybe they're building to doing that with future episodes, but I had this thought the first time I watched this show, and I'm having it again now. How much do you think that this show is trying to be just a whole piece throughout all of the episodes? I think maybe none of these are supposed to be standalone, and you're supposed to watch the entire season beginning to end like one story.
Well, I have to finish this season to probably say for sure, but it does kind of feel like that. You know, it's not supposed to be like a filler episode every week like Doctor Who does. It's one long, continuous story.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I have talked about this before. We use the term filler differently. I don't know if you can necessarily consider something filler if it's informing things, even if it's not plot stuff. Doctor Who episodes are informing each other, even when the stories are standalone. But there's this weird vibe I get from class where it's like, all of the questions that we have about character motivations and relationships and, like, philosophies and stuff is like it's all supposed to be a slow burn. Just like in terms of theming, Doctor Who will make one episode about a theme. This show does not seem to be doing that. It seems to be we're sort of dealing with a couple of different thematic ideas, and we're going to bring them in and out throughout all of these episodes, and they're not going to get any closure until maybe the end of the show.
Yeah, but I find it kind of weird that we can't figure it out. I mean, like, a lot of shows you kind of get that feeling like Orphan Black or Lost, where it's, you know, everything is just like building up to something, but
Yeah, but even then, well, I mean, I don't watch Orphan Black or Lost.
you know the concept, you know, a bunch of mysteries set up throughout the season, and all the episodes are connected together.
Yeah, but even in shows like that, like even in shows like, say, I don't know, Sense8 or something, it just feels real weird to me that Class doesn't have episodes that seem to be tackling a single idea through the whole episode. I mean, you could make an argument. You could say that, like, the night visiting tackles, like, grief. The coach with the dragon tattoo tackles, like, well, I suppose also grief.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels weird that we're setting up ideas in this episode that don't get paid off in this episode or these two episodes.
Like it's trying to be self-contained and set things up all throughout, and it's not really working.
Yeah.
It feels awkward.
Well, I mean, what's set up going forward is just the governess and her, like, whatever it is that they're doing. And that's set up decently enough. Like, I don't feel like that stuff is a distraction from anything else. I don't know. Like, we have these sort of interesting conversations that make me actually think about these characters, and then we don't do anything with it.
Pretty much. It's like it doesn't know if it just wants to be self-contained or it's trying to set things up, and it's not obvious enough. In Doctor Who, it's pretty obvious when they're trying to set up story or things for the future, and when it's just for this episode.
Also, just to get away from this,
Yeah.
this is probably the best that Tanya has ever been written. Like, I actually feel like she is a person of her age in these 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably because she doesn't have that much to do, so we don't try to give her a bunch of weird dialogue. When she finds out that Ram and April had sex and her reaction is just to laugh at it, like, that is the most natural reaction to anything she has ever had.
This is the one story she didn't feel like the alien.
But tell me if you had this. This probably has the worst example of Patrick Ness having no idea how young people talk. When Ram mentions Frodo and April doesn't know what he's talking about, and it's some old movie my dad likes.
Yes, I know that was so bad.
Everyone knows who what Lord of the Rings is.
I mean, the Hobbit movies ended 2 years ago.
Maybe I can buy that April doesn't know Frodo Baggins by name, and that she has to ask for clarification from what he's from. No young person, with as not all that young as Ram looks, no person in their late teens is going to refer to Lord of the Rings as those old movies my dad likes. People had a problem in Captain America Civil War with Spider-Man calling The Empire Strikes Back that really old movie. Lord of the Rings is several decades more recent than Empire Strikes Back. That franchise swept the Oscars. That is like, the Lord of the Rings franchise is a cultural icon. Everyone knows what Lord of the Rings is.
I know, it's so bad. And I think it's kind of funny they make a Buffy reference in this. And that's even older than Lord of the Rings.
Right. Less people know Buffy the Vampire Slayer than know Lord of the Rings. Come on.
I know, it's like, okay, this cult classic show that's 20 years old. They remember that, but they don't remember this franchise that's been going on and just kind of ended.
Even worse than you're making it sound, though, because clearly both of those lines are written for the audience, and they never say Buffy by name. They just say the Hellmouth. I can guarantee you there are even people who know what Buffy is that don't know what the Hellmouth is.
I didn't know what it was for 4 seasons. I forgot.
You write that joke for the same audience who is supposed to not know what Lord of the Rings is, except that their parents like it? What are you, crazy?
He's an alien, I keep telling you.
But I mean, it's Ram, and that's like he has not had any dialogue this bad until now. It's just the most ridiculous thing. It's the worst thing about this whole episode.
Well, they did have one other line. I think it was from Tanya, where she said that Ram and the other Gil are the nicest people I know.
I buy that coming from her, because she and Ram are like best friends. They have a connection, and we've been told how many times April is nice by now that we just sort of take it as a given. Like, that doesn't seem weird coming from that character.
I guess, but all I thought was, if these are the 2 nicest people you know, you need better friends.
Like, we've established that by now, that these are her only friends.
Yeah, she better start looking around. Because so far, April is only nice because we say she's nice, and Ram's kind of a dick most of the time. He's getting a little better, I will admit, but he started off pretty bad.
Okay, there's one other thing that I want to talk about with the editing, and we can use it to transition to the other half of the story, because it's about Quill. At the end, when Charlie puts the thing back in the box, and Matthias is like, if you did it, you'd be just as much a monster as a Shadowkin, and Quill is like, you have your whole race die in front of you, and then you can talk to me about monsters. And she, screams it, and she's real overdramatic and real, she's clearly, about to break down, and, it's fine, but then over the space of, 2 seconds, we cut to Matthias' face, and then we cut back to her, and she's gone from, shouting and about to cry to completely stone-faced. Like, I buy that she, like, covers up her emotions, but, like, not a second has passed and she finished screaming that sentence, and suddenly she's just complete, just soldier.
It's like the scene was filmed way after the breakdown.
It's real weird editing. Just keep the camera on her face until she calms down. Then you cut to the other two. Like, you don't need to. I don't know. I am never like this fixated on tiny momentary editing. This show just bothers me so much. Like, on that front specifically.
It's very obvious that the scene was filmed like long after she was calmed down or way before she freaked out.
A couple of seconds at least for her to calm herself down that we don't get to see. I guess talking about that plot now, like, how do we feel about the governess and Mateus, and is Charlie being way too much of an asshole to Quill? Because I feel like he's being way too much of an asshole.
Kinda. I mean, I like Quill because she's just so off. She's probably the coolest character on the show, but
Like, it's just with Charlie, we're doing this weird thing. We're doing with what we did with April, except worse, where Mateus is talking about how moral of a person Charlie is, and other characters are talking about how moral of a person he is, and yet he's constantly dodging around the fact that, yes, Charlie, you are treating Quill like a slave. Quill is like, you call me a slave, and he's like, you call you slave. No, it doesn't matter who calls who what. She is your slave. That is how you treat her. You force her to do every little thing for you. She has no autonomy. She can't make decisions for herself. She will literally get hurt if she does anything that you don't want. How do you not understand that this is a slave relationship and that you are being a massive jerk?
I'm trying to remember. Quill is against him or like a bad guy, or I'm trying to figure out why is he using her as a slave.
They were part of two, like, separate factions, and, like, she was pretty much the terrorist faction and he was royalty, and she got captured as, like, punishment. She now has to do whatever he says, and she has this thing in her head that will hurt her if he ever gets hurt, and she can't ever disobey him. It's a whole thing. She can only fire her gun when he's in danger. She's not a nice person, but everything that she's done so far has been out of self-preservation or, like, her ideals. Like, her people were being mistreated. Like, the show wants us to side with the bourgeois. She was wronged. Her people were wronged by his people, and yet he is constantly, like, underselling it. Oh, she deserves nothing, and it's so...
If that is the case, then yeah, there needs to be like talk with Charlie or something to make him realize that this isn't right, this situation. But it feels like they're not going to go there.
Like, I remember the concept of the next episode, or, well, I mean, it's already out by now. It and the one after it. We're 2 episodes behind now. But I know that the next episode after these is, like, sort of everyone confessing their sins and pretty much laying out all of their baggage. And that's another episode that I thought was better than the rest, and I really hope that that holds up when we get to it. But I don't remember Charlie's, like, behavior towards Quill being a part of it. I might be wrong, but I don't know if the show is ever going to address how he is being sort of a weird, oblivious, rich slave owner right now, and it's real uncomfortable.
Yeah, pretty bad. I mean, I forgot a lot of the backstory to Quill, so I was like, I'm not sure how to feel about this, but if her people were wronged and he's just keeping her as a slave and he's just too blinded by his royalty or his selfishness to realize it, then yeah, he's a dick.
Because he doesn't come off as a naturally selfish or pompous person. It's just like he doesn't seem to treat Quill like she's a person, and it's just her. And I know that there's tension between their races, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it seems like to me almost like he doesn't really realize or understand what he's doing is wrong, or if he does, he's just too self righteous to admit it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is getting something that I want done, so I'm going to ignore everyone saying I'm basically being a slave owner.
Is that Quill is the only one who says it. No one else calls him out. And that's why it feels like the show is taking his side.
I'm trying to think. I thought his boyfriend said something. I can't remember.
Like, they have a short conversation about it. I think it's in Night Vision. I don't remember. I really hope I'm wrong about the next episode, and I hope that that's something that they talk about. This is bugging me so much, I'm probably going to sit down and watch that right now, or as soon as we're done. I need the show to acknowledge, with someone other than Quill, that this is messed up.
Charlie just feels like this very royal, rich kid that like doesn't understand what he's doing is wrong or doesn't want to understand.
I mean, that's mostly just because, again, he's the alien, but the way it's played comes off as, yeah, like sort of the secluded rich kid trope.
Yeah.
And maybe we're intentionally drawing on that trope just as like an anchor, but I don't know. Their relationship this many episodes in, it feels weird that they are still this antagonistic with each other.
They should be like forming some kind of bond, or at the very least, like you said, bring up that this is a slave relationship.
Their dynamic needs to have changed by now, and it's weird that it hasn't. I feel like we covered everything. I mean, we didn't talk about themselves outside of... But I mean, there's not that much to talk about with them, though. I mean, there's the weird sex moment, and there's, like, their nature as a plot device. The king himself still isn't really much of a character.
Oh yeah, there's one last thing. King cutting his connection off to April. If he could have done that, I thought he was trying to do that in the last episode, wasn't he?
April says they're still connected, but like it's weakened back to where it was. So like they're not going to be feeling each other's emotions anymore. She's not going to be able to summon the blades anymore.
I understand that, but why couldn't the priestess or anybody? He had people in there trying to get rid of the connection or lessen it before, and he just reached inside of himself and lessened it.
I don't know, maybe that's just dumb, but I take it as, like, didn't they do something to strengthen the connection?
No.
Like, on purpose or by accident? Like, because that's something that they did, they can reverse that. They can get back to square one, but they can't, like, get rid of it.
I don't remember at any point them trying to straighten the connection. It was just the same longest time, and then all of a sudden it got really strong, and he wanted it to be cut off, and then...
Is it just that their connection is strengthening with time? Because if that's the case, then you're absolutely right. And if he can reverse it to that degree, he should be able to get rid of it altogether.
Yeah, it's a time thing from everything I remember, because he has done nothing to try to force this.
Can't be the pathway between worlds is broken because she tells them to destroy the pathway between the worlds, but then she says that he is the one that lessened the connection. I don't know, it's real dumb. That was stupid. This show has flashes of decent ideas, but overall it's just a real dumb show.
Yes. It just felt like a real cop-out ending. And they already had a cop-out. They cut the connection to the worlds off. They said, oh, well, that lessened it. But then they had him physically go inside of himself and lessen it himself.
I think we've covered everything we could about this episodes.
I think so. It's crazy.
Yeah.